what? He said, yeah, didn't pay the bills. And so he's ready to pick up the transmitter. And had one of the little forklifts to the back of the truck. I guess they were somehow they're going to get it out of there. I don't. At any rate, I said, you can't. I stalled and stalled and stalled. I said, my God, you can't take the transmitter. If you take the transmitter, I don't have a job. I mean, this is ridiculous. But I forestalled and kept him from taking the transmitter till Bert got back, and some other bird paid some payment or something.
See, with the way the economy is nowadays, we keep waiting for the same eventuality to happen nowadays. Hey, just back that forklift over there. There goes the WTMA transmitter down I-26.
Our transmitter is so old, it's paid for. Now, there might be a second mortgage on it. I'm not for sure.
Didn't Marconi install it, I believe?
I tell you now that there's two transmitters if still at the old transmitter building.
Yep, things are still the same.
Still the same.
On Orange Grove Road, right?
Yeah, there was when I first came here to TMA.
What year?
Well, I came here. I was here in real early, but I came back. I was only here briefly, and this would have been back in the mid '60s. But I came back for good in 1980, last part of 1987, and we were owned by Faircom Communications. Joel Fairman was the guy's name, and he had a general manager. I think his last name was Ballantyne, Bob Ballantyne, I believe it was. But they had contacted me. I was running the cable television system in Somerville, and they had contacted me about coming down and doing a morning radio show. And I said, you guys got to be crazy. I said, I'm the general manager of the cable television system here in Somerville. I'm working for Cable Television of Dorchester, which at that time was owned by Wometco, which was the big vending company. They owned movie theaters and vending companies, and I'm doing well and making more money than I ever made in my life. I said, no way.
And what was TMA playing, Dan?
Yeah, what was the
country?
format?
They were playing country music. Yeah. And it was a satellite delivered service. SMN, Satellite Music Network, country.
So in '87, on TMA in '87, you were doing the morning show doing country.
Yeah. When I came, we were down on Orange Grove Road, and I was the only employee. They didn't have any. They didn't tell me that.
Oh, we've got to have you tell some Orange Grove Road stories. but speaking of stories, we have some people who would like to join us on the conversation at 556-1250, including this little blast from the past for Dan Moon joining us here on the Morning Buzz. Caller, good morning. Say hello to Dan Moon.
Good morning, Dan Moon. This is Mike Robertson.
My gosh almighty.
How you doing?
Mike Robertson.
Well,
Hi, Mike.
I got a WNOK story. I figured it was okay to call in.
Yes.
Okay. My first radio contest I ever won was at WNOK. I won Beach Boy tickets.
That's right.
I do have a connection here.
You were from that area, from the Columbia area.
Mike, tell everybody your connection with WTMA for all the listeners. We keep forgetting. We keep thinking everybody. I mean, once you move to Charleston, you kind of stay in Charleston forever. Right. But in the post-Hugo era, 20 years ago this year, so many new people have come to the Low Country, and a lot of people may not remember. Mike, you're many years involved here at WTMA.
Yeah, I was hired probably about 2 months before Hurricane Hugo hit town, and so I got to ride out the storm with Dan Moon and everybody else, and pretty much stayed there as a news director at WTMA for about 10 years or so.
Mike was Fred Story's predecessor.
Yeah.
Mike took over the news department, and who was the little Amy
Garrison.
Amy Garrison. She was worked with you in the news department,
and prior to her, remember Dorothy Conflinty?
Dorothy Conflinty was the first news girl we had.
Right.
And who was the guy from? He's dead now, I think.
Dave Parker.
Dave Parker,
yeah. Our radio archivist / historian, John Quincy, knows all the answers.
Dave Parker was there. He had been at Channel 4 for many years. And
he had worked with me at WXTC FM for a while.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, talk about working with Dan and also going through that whole Hugo experience, because here we come up on the 20th anniversary, believe it or not, 20 years this September. I mean, and today's June the 1st, first day of hurricane season. What was it like working with Dan and riding out Hugo?
Oh, it was an amazing thing. I remember one of the things I'll never forget is after Hurricane Hugo hit, and we were broadcasting live from the Charleston County Emergency Center all day. And it's one of those things where all we did was talk about dry ice and where there's clothing and all that kind of stuff. We did that for about a 12-hour shift. And then I remember leaving there at night, about 7 o'clock or so, and going into the inky dark night with no lights anywhere in Charleston and listening to Dan Moon. And, it was amazing because what we did in the news department was we talked about, like I said, dry ice, where you can get there. This is close.
You became a community bulletin board, basically.
We were. And then what Dan did was he was the psychologist. he talked to people, and you could just hear the emotion in their voice as they tried to deal with what they were going through. No hope. How can we ever get through this stuff? Dan was everybody's psychologist.
And a lot of people remember Dan from the days there following Hugo. I mean, how many people still mention to you, I remember you during Hugo?
Oh, my gosh.
A lot of people. Mike, anybody say anything to you, they still come up to me and say, I listened to you back during Hurricane Hugo. But you got to remember, when WTMA went to talk radio on this very day 20 years ago, we didn't have that many listeners. I mean, let's face it.
Well, you've been playing country music. That explains a lot.
Well, we were playing country, but let me, Mike, just bear with me just a second. We were playing country, yes, but I was so upset that we were going talk radio.
You were against the switch.
I was totally against it.
Why?
Well, because it was my baby. I mean, I had come in there and taken this thing over a year and a half earlier that literally was number 22 out of a 23-station market. Had nothing. No sales, no audience, no nothing. And I was the only employee. And I had worked with the equipment. I had cleaned things up. I mean, you wouldn't believe what the time and effort I put in there. And finally, we began to actually show up in the ratings again. And we finally got to a point where we were like number 12 in the market. And we were still moving up. And And that was with only about half power.
So in other words, nothing's changed in the last 20 years. Management still doesn't know when to leave something good enough alone. Mike, I got to let you go because we've got other people waiting in the wings, buddy. But thank you for calling in this morning.
My pleasure.
Mike, good to talk to you.
Dan, it's been a pleasure.
Mike Robertson, WTMA News Director, giving us a buzz. Dan Moon's in the studio. We've got so many more stories. We're going to talk about the switch to talk radio 20 years ago today, and more about Hurricane Hugo, and more of your phone calls. And
about time you played a commercial. Don't we have to pay for this?
We got to pay the bill somehow. Yeah, exactly. And we'll see. Hopefully management will leave us alone long enough to at least get through this stop set. And then we'll be back with more with Dan Moon as our 70th birthday celebration continues here on the Big Talker, WTMA News Time 923.
Radio 1250, WTMA Charleston.
WTMA News Time is 927. I'm Richard Todd, in here with my predecessor, the man who signed the station on as a talk station 20 years ago today, June 1st, 1989. Our 70th birthday celebration continues with Dan Moon in the studio with us. And you can join us at 556-1250. And Dan, somebody else who wants to join the conversation here, a former anchorman for not only WTMA but ABC News 4. Say hello to Dan Moon, caller.
Hey, hello, Dan. How are you?
I recognize this.
Recognize the voice?
I sure do, buddy.
Dean Swanson. How you doing, bud?
Just fine. Matter of fact, when I was at Channel 4, it was NBC.
Yeah, that's
right. That's right. It was NBC News 4 at the time.
It's very confusing.
I remember, Dean, when you came over and went to work with us, I was a big fan of yours. Dean was a television star. I mean, he'd been in television. I mean, he was a news guy.
I wouldn't say star.
Well, I did. But he was a news anchor. And we had a chance to bring Dean on board with us over here at TMA. I thought that was just marvelous.
Dean, what years were you here at TMA?
Fall of 95 to fall of 98.
Now, you can't say this, and Dan would never say this, but I would, and that is that was, in many cases, all due respect to my good friends who are there now, that was the last time that News 4 was relevant with Dean Swanson and Dee Crosby as the anchor people. I thought y'all did a great job.
Dee and Dean.
Yeah, Dee and Dean.
And Dean, back in those days, you and Dee, you had really started to make tremendous inroads. I mean, you were coming up in the ratings. You were giving...
And management doesn't know well enough to leave well enough alone,
No,
right?
and you were beginning to give Channel 5 a run for their money.
We were.
And I was so happy with that. I said, not that I disliked Channel 5, don't get me wrong, but they had always dominated the market, and Channel 2 was always number 3 in the market, and you guys were always a distant second. And I said, man, isn't this just great? I love it. And when they broke you two up, and it just never was.
No, it never was the same. Dean, talk about working with Dan here. We got about 45 seconds, but just talk about working with the guy.
Well, in addition with Dan, I also worked with Mike Robertson, who was on earlier, worked with Fred Story, and Dan and I, the only hurricane story I have to tell, happened after Hugo, because I was at 4 when Hugo hit. But you remember, Dan, when that hurricane was approaching and everything went into high gear, and because it looked and I don't remember the name of it, it looked as if it were going to hit.
Well, Dean, hang over. I'm going to have you complete this story because we're going to continue the walk down memory lane in a moment.
1939 to 2009.